I got nothing. Uh, eh, I got nothing for a intro bit. So time to talk about Raizo some more. This video specifically will be going over from when they arrive in the future all the way up to just before the Battle of Onigashima, like when they're on their way to the battle. Same formula I've been doing for the other ones. Blah, 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 blah. Standard disclosure information. When last I left, Raizo had been sent into the future along with the rest of the group, Kinemon, Momonosuke, Kiku, and Kanjuro. They all got sent 20 years into the future. By Toki, they pop from, as the Odin Castle is burning to the ground, pop into the future, into the same area where Odin Castle was, fall several feet, land on the ground, and have to start trying to figure out very quickly what they're going to do. Thankfully, well, not so much thankfully. First, they see their own grave markers, which is just a very disturbing thing to see, in all honesty. Yeah, very disturbing thing to see, in all honesty. That's my own grave. Fun. So they have to deal with that. Then they end up actually coming across a group that are very loyal to the Kozuki family, and what ended up happening is that they have, over the past 20 years, every year they have continued to come back to this spot to wait and see if anybody shows up. Thankfully, this year, it happened. The group pops into existence, falls out of the sky, and they start, they get introduced to the new group, and then it's basically like, okay, yeah, we're the ones that have been kind of waiting in the shadows for the past 20 years for you guys to show up again. And yeah, we're loyal to the Kozuki clan. If you see someone that has a crescent moon on their ankle, they're part of the same group, so just keep an eye out for them. So then they basically break up into the idea of, okay, Kinemon, Momonosuke, Kanjuro, and Raizo are all going to leave Wano to go and try to make their way to Zou, so that way they can try to find Inarashi and Nekomamushi. They know that Inarashi and Nekomamushi were not sent into the future because they were not part of the group that was there, but they also don't know exactly where they are, so they end up, making that assumption. Also, they know that the Minks are allies to the Kozuki clan, so even if Inarashi and Nekomamushi are not on Zou, they would still, like, the Minks on Zou would still be allies to the Kozuki clan and willing to help them. I'm quite sure of it. So they make up that decision. Kiku stays behind to gather information in Wano, and the rest head out. On their way there, they unfortunately end up getting overwhelmed by this giant storm as they are getting close to Zou, and Raizo ends up getting knocked out of the ship that they are in. And now, Zou is a wandering island. It's also a wandering island as well. Considering it has its own mind. It is a sentient elephant. But there is kind of this question that I've always had of, like, how did they intend to find their way to Zou? None of them are minks. Minks that are born on Zou are supposed to have, like, a natural homing device. That's how, like, Inarashi and Nekomamushi were able to find their way to Zou, when they were... when they helped Odin find his way to Zou with Roger, and when they went back to Zou after, everything happened with Odin's execution, and how, like, Beppo was able to help lead the rest of the Heart Pirates to Zou in the first place, because they have this, like, natural homing instinct to find their way to Zou. Nobody on this vessel has one of those natural instincts to find their way to Zou, and I don't think they have Vivre cards either for Inarashi or Nekomamushi. We know that there are Vivre cards in Wano, but those are more something I think Kaido and his crew had. I don't know how much Luffy and, how much Raizo and Kinemon and the others knew about Vivre cards. We know they learn about them eventually, but you get the idea. So they sail off. They try making their way to Zou. They technically get very close to Zou, get knocked... They get hit by one of the big storms that happens in the Grand Line and the New World side. Raizo gets knocked out of the boat and ends up drifting to Zou. From there, he ends up climbing his way up up one of Zunisha's legs and making his way up to the top, where he is then found by the minks. There would be a bit of a funny thing that could have happened with this, is that Zunesha sucked Raizo up in its trunk, and then when he did the whole throws water on his back, Raizo got shot out of that and landed on the back of Zoe. It's just like, that was an unpleasant experience, but at least I'm up here. I never want to know what the inside of an elephant's trunk looks like again. It lands there. That would be a funny thing. That might be a question for Oda. How did Raizo get to Zoe, type of a thing? But so that's just kind of my headcanon. And he ends up on Zoe, where he ends up interacting, is reunited with Inuarashi and Nekomamushi separately. Finds out about the day and the night cycles for the minks. Finds out a whole bunch of stuff about Zoe. And then one of the things that happens while he is there is, of course, Zunisha does, the sucks up water into its trunk and then throws it over its back, and waters the forest. That's Zoe and all of that stuff. Gives them fish, all of this other stuff. So this then means that Raizo sees this, and then because he was inside of the burning castle, that was Odin Castle burning down, and he was unable to do anything. He is like, I am not going to be in that situation again. And he's like talking to Inuarashi, and Inuarashi explains it to him, and he's like, okay, so this is where Raizo uses one of his scrolls to gather up just as much water as possible into his into the scroll, so that way later on, if he needs it, he might do it to more than one scroll. We might find out later he's got another scroll all waiting and ready. He was on Zoe for a while, because Raizo is on Zoe for the whole time that it takes for Kinemon and Kanjuro and Momonosuke to land on Dressrosa, and they get separated from Kanjuro, and then they end up in Punk Hazard, and then all of that stuff to happen in reverse. But there's also the fact that Jack shows up. Jack shows up with his contingent of beast pirates, and they are led to Zoe because, of course, Kanjuro sends them a message and the ability to try to find their way to Zoe, and tells them that Raizo was there. And Jack goes and he starts attacking the minks and trying poisoning them, attacking them, fighting Inuarashi and Nekomamushi. And all of this time Raizo is tied up in the whale tree to the road poneglyph, by the way. He's just tied to the road poneglyph this whole time. And, and they would have people who would, sneak away to, get him food, give him food and water, because, for 17 days this happens. Or for, so many days this happens, and they keep Raizo tied up there. I'm assuming this is one of the few times where, Inuarashi and Nekomamushi are like, okay, we're going to work together and tie Raizo up. They do that, and then they go and fight. Or whatever. Or whichever one was in charge at that point in time when Jack showed up is like, okay, tie Raizo to the tree. I think it was Inuarashi that was awake at that point in time when Jack shows up. Okay, we're going to tie Raizo to the poneglyph. Raizo was not agreeing to this. He fought them the entire way, I'm sure of it, but he gets pinned and tied up. I'm assuming with sea prism stone chains, but I don't know if that's ever completely explained. But for this whole time frame, he's trapped there and he can't do anything. He can't go and he can't help them or anything like that. And he knows that, and he's just crying because he knows that so many of the minks are injured and being hurt and everything like that because of Jack, because every time any of them show up to bring him food and water, they are injured. And he just keeps begging them to surrender him to the enemy so that way they're not sacrificing their own lives for him, because Raizo has low self-esteem. He gets better, but he has low self-esteem, and he just wants a date. And as I said in the last video, hopefully now he can get one, now that he's a big celebrity in Wano, possibly going to be made a daimyo of one of the regions, for all we know. We're not sure about that though yet. Or by the time this video is out, we already know this and I look stupid. Don't know about that yet. But what ends up happening is, eventually, we know that Sanji and Nami and their group show up at Zoe. They, Jack left to go try to save Doflamingo. They show up at Zoe, and they are able to chase off the rest of the beast pirates. And between Chopper and Caesar, they are able to make an antidote for the poison and give the minks as much medical treatment as they can and everything else like that, and they get them all taken care of. And then, Luffy and the others, along with, Luffy and Law and the others arrive, and they are then, after everything's calmed down, they're just like, oh yeah, we should, then we have, the rest of them show up, because like this whole time, there's the whole thing that like the minks have been denying that they have no idea who Raizo is. There's no Raizo here. Raizo, we don't know any Raizos. There's no one from Wano here. There's no samurai. There's no ninja. Just leave us alone. And they've been claiming that the whole time from Jack. And telling Jack that. And they've been telling the Straw Hats the same thing. And, that whole setup there, that whole spiel. And then, of course, Kanjuro and Kinemon show up. And then we get the whole Raizo is safe moment, which I love. And they are then all taken up to the whale tree. And they are then introduced to Raizo. And of course, this leads to a very funny moment. Because we have it that... I love this moment. This moment is so funny. Because the whole way there... They're like, oh my god, he's a ninja, and like Luffy and Chopper and Usopp are all kind of like geeking out about this and everything, which is really funny. That they're like, oh my god, he's a ninja. Let's see if he can do like clones and different things like that. That they're just like really interested to see if Raizo can do. And they get up there and they're just like, They're really disappointed because he does not look the way that they think a ninja should look, which is just really funny. Can I help you with something? Yes, Mommy, you can pet me while you talk about the ninja boy. You're a good girl. You're my good girl. Love the Brenda Boo. Love the baby Boo. You're such a good girl. Yes, you are. You're my good girl. You're my very good girl. Yes, you are. Okay. And... so they get there and they're all just disappointed in how Raizo looks, because they're just like, you don't look like a ninja. And he's kind of insulted by this. And then like they're like, okay, they get over that kind of quickly. And then they start begging him to do like ninja tricks and stuff like that. Show them his ninja techniques. And it's just really funny because like most of this it's like Luffy's, Chopper, Usopp, Frankie's kind of interested in this as well. Brooks, I guess, mildly interested in it. Sanji is not there at this point in time because he was taken by the Big Mom pirate, so he's not going to find out that Raizo is safe for a long time. They'll explain that to him later. So they go through all of that, and then they have the funny moment where he's just like, he is just refusing to do any of his tricks. And there's this it's so funny because even Zoro and Law are kind of like sad that they're not going to get to see Raizo do any ninja tricks. They're just like, which is just so funny because like Zoro and Law are like, they try to give off the very stereotypical, I'm a cool guy, I'm not interested in this stuff. But it's like, they're still like, to a degree, they're still kind of kids at heart. And they're still like, little boys growing up hearing about ninjas. And they're kind of like, we were going to meet a real ninja and he's not going to do any of his tricks. So I just find that so funny. That moment there, I just find that hilarious. And then Raizo relents and he starts showing off a bunch of his, his ninjutsu and everything else like that he's able to do. The shadow clones and different things like that. And then we get through the whole explanation of, Raizo, Kinemon, Kanjuro, are just so happy to be reunited because it's been so long, so many weeks since they've seen each other and they were unsure if the others were alive. They're all reunited. Finds out Momonosuke's okay. And then this kind of all happens while Luffy and the others are inside kind of learning about the road poneglyph and everything. And, they go back inside at this point in time. And, Raizo looked and, like, he saw, like, when they were outside, he saw, like, the devastation left behind by Jack's attack and everything. So he's feeling very guilty about this because he's like, well, it's my fault that all of this happened in the first place. No, it's Kanjuro's fault, but you won't find out about that for another several weeks. Close to a month. And what ends up happening is, of course, through all the discussions and everything, they end up forming the Ninja Pirate Minx Samurai Alliance with the Straw Hats, the Minx, and the Heart Pirates, along with, you know, the samurai from Wano. So they specifically, you know, they build that, they form that alliance, and then Jack shows back up again and starts causing trouble. Starts attacking Zunesha, which of course results in, you know, Zunesha being told by Momonosuke to fight back after the unusual voice in his head, you know, starts talking to him. And from there, you know, you know, Zunesha knocks Jack's boat out. And then they treat Zunesha, and then they all work on dividing up into their different units. Luffy, Nami's, Brooke, and Chopper, along with Pedro, are going to go to Whole Cake to go get Sanji. The rest of the group are, well, Nekomamushi, along with some of his guardians, I believe, are the ones that are going to go and find Marco. And then part of the group are going to, including Raizo, are going to go back to Wano and start, you know, meet up with Kiku and start gathering up the information there that will hopefully be useful to them. And then, of course, there's the group that are going to stay on Zou for a little bit and then make their way to Wano later. So when next we catch up with them, we know that, you know, the samurai and Raizo and the, you know, part of Luffy's crew and everything, and the Heart Pirates all make their way to Wano within the Polar Tang, which is probably going to be a pretty crowded venture. Although probably a bit easier to navigate than having to deal with all the horrible weather in the New World. So they make their way to Zou. From there, we know that Raizo just continues to start gathering information and everything else like that, reacquainting himself with the landscape of Wano after 20 years, after how much it's changed. And, you know, they're instructed by Kinemon to blend in with the people of Wano, so that way they can work on, like, recruiting allies and everything else like that. We don't really see that much of Raizo for a while because he's not he's not with Kinemon when Kiku and the rest of when Luffy and his Straw Hats show back up and, you know, have Kiku and everything. He's not there with that group. He's off doing, like, scouting at that point in time. The next main instance that we have where Raizo is involved is, of course, when Luffy has been taken to Udon Prison. And from there, it ends up being, you know, Raizo works on trying to... You're being very noisy. Raizo works on trying to figure out a way to help Luffy escape. And part of that involves, well, we have to get the Sea Prism Stone handcuffs off of him. And if we can't do that, then we can't get him out of here. It's kind of... I mean, like, Luffy would still be able to fight because he's still pretty strong, but, you know, and he trains, you know, he uses his time in the prison to train more. Which is something very Luffy-like. But there's, you know, they still need to get the cuffs off of him. So Raizo spends a bunch of this time flitting around the inside of the prisoner mines, trying to find where they have the keys for the Sea Prism Stone handcuffs, and keeps, you know, going and talking to Luffy and, like, catching him up on things. And then, of course, we have... And Raizo also ends up having to work with Caribou during this time because Caribou is in the mines and blah, 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 blah reasons. And Caribou actually, unfortunately, ends up being rather useful during this time frame because he's able to help with, you know, taking care of some of the defenses. Because of his swamp abilities. I don't like Caribou. Nobody likes Caribou. Or very few people like Caribou, let's put it that way. Very few people like Caribou. And what ends up happening is, of course, that is, you know, sometime in this time frame is when Queen shows up. And he starts setting up the Sumo Inferno and everything else like that that Luffy and Hirogoro are, you know, being a part of and everything else like that. Also during this time frame, what ends up happening is Raizo ends up finding Kawamatsu. Because Kawamatsu has, of course, been being held in the prisoner mines, you know, tied up in his own private cell, chained up in his own private cell for the past, was it like 13 years, something like that? Because he's like, I think he has Hiyori with him for like 7 years, and then he's like tied up for 12 to 13 years, something like that. He's been tied up for over a decade. He's been chained up in the prisoner mines in his own dark, dank cell for over a decade. I'll go over that more when I get to Kawamatsu. But Raizo finds him, and he's just overjoyed to have found him. And they end up being able to, with Caribou, they're able to get Luffy more food and everything else like that. So they're able to work with that, and then eventually, Luffy and Hirogoro are, of course, doing the Sumo Inferno during this time frame. Raizo just keeps wandering around trying to find the keys. Eventually, he is able to find them. And this basically then shifts around because we have it that they have the Sumo Inferno going for Luffy and Hirogoro. And then during this same time frame is when they also end up broadcasting the execution of Yasuie. And Raizo is watching this, and he is just horrified by this because he knows exactly who Yasuie is and everything. He was a very impactful person in the lives of the Scabbards, and he's just very he's very upset about this, and Kawamatsu is like listening in the background too, and I think he's able to figure it out too, as are the rest of the Scabbards that are watching this. As I said, Kiku was like one of the only Scabbards that didn't actually watch this transmission when it happened because and I went over that in her videos. But so like Raizo is just heartbroken by this, and of course, Yasuie, it's executed and everything. And this then, because Big Mom shows up, starts just destroying everything in the prison. Raizo uses this to his advantage, gets the keys, frees Luffy and Hirogoro, which is kind of pointless at this point in time because by the time that happens, Luffy and Hirogoro have been put into the Sumo Inferno anyway, where they don't have the Sea Prism Stone cuffs on them anymore, but now they have the exploding neck collars, which Luffy ends up being able to break off of himself and Hirogoro anyway. But they still need the keys to help Kid and a bunch of the other prisoners and everything. And then, they get, they have the whole big thing with like Big Mom rampaging. She gets knocked out by having Queen headbutt her. Well, headbutt is a kind way of saying Queen just kind of lands on her head and knocks her out, which then kind of reverses her amnesia later when she wakes up. And, Queen then leaves Babanuki in charge. Babanuki brings out the plague bullets, starts using the plague bullets on the prisoners to try to get them to listen to him. Luffy and the others, now that they are all free, including Kawamatsu, since Raizo freed him, and got him his sword back and everything, and Kiku is there along with Chopper. And we have like the great scene where all of them just really liking destroying that rope, aren't you? You have fun with that. And they end up, we get like the great scene that's, the great, it was like a double page spread with like all of them all together, as they're all like gearing up and ready to fight against the guards and save the prisoners and everything. Which goes well. They succeed after Luffy gets badly poisoned in the process. And then, Tama takes over the prisoner mine by using her, Kibi Kibi no Mi on the, using her Kibi Kibi no Mi on the beast pirates that are there, that are the gifters. And then, there's things kind of slowed down a bit. I mean, like, Raizo is there for a bunch of this stuff because, he's just, there in the background for this stuff as it's going on. And then they, of course, make their way to Amagata Village after this, where once they are able to, reconfer with each other and, see what's going on now that they have control of the prisoner mines and they have the Yakuza on their side. And, via all the communications, because, Raizo is there as, Kinemon is communicating with a bunch of the other, with the other Scabbards and the rest of their allies around the country and everything. They are able to, coordinate what they're going to do, meet up at Tokage Port and everything else like that. And, have all of their allies join them there. And then there's like a 2-week time frame in here where they're just basically prepping this whole time frame. Prepping and doing some just training and everything else like that. And they get through that, and then it's time for them to head out for the raid. About a day before the raid happens is when the Scabbards, along with Shinobu and Momonosuke, all head to Tokage Port. And they end up, then unfortunately when they get there, there is no one there. There's a huge storm going on. There's one little dinky boat that they all get in. They leave Shinobu and Momonosuke on the shore as they head out. This then leads into where Kiku confronts Kinemon about, like, we have to figure out who the traitor is now. And then, of course, Kanjuro just reveals himself and reveals that he's been a member of the Kurozumi family this whole time, and that he's been spying on them this whole time, which, of course, results in all of the Scabbards now being very and rightfully angry at Kanjuro. Kinemon cuts his head off. They find out he's the clone Kanjuro made by his brush fruit. They then try to... they all just kind of panic at this point in time. Kawamatsu goes back to shore, and I'll go talk about that with him more. He goes back to shore and tries to fight against Kanjuro, fight against Kanjuro to protect Shinobu and Momonosuke. Momonosuke is kidnapped, and all hope seems lost because Momonosuke has been kidnapped and a bunch of beast pirate ships are showing up. And then, bada bing, bada boom, shows the alliance. The Heart Pirates show up, the Minx ship show up, the Straw Hat ship shows up. All of them show up, and they are able to, take out the Beast Pirate ships that showed up. And, they kind of try to get, Momonosuke back, but Momonosuke tells them not to worry about him for the time being. Just worry about getting to Onigashima so they can fight against Kaido. And I'll go over that more, like what Momonosuke would be going through at that point in time when I talk about him in this series. But, so they go through all of that. And which Momonosuke is going to have a lot of videos for him because he's around for a lot of things. A lot of things. And from there, that is when Kuroshiro shows up. And he reveals that he is Denjiro. And all of that, and that's where we're going to leave this, because next we will be heading directly into the full battle on Onigashima and everything that happens there. That's what I have for this. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!